Beginning with problem number 7, we're looking at a 30, 60, 90 degree triangle. F is the short leg of the right triangle. So the hypotenuse, which is h, is going to be twice that length. So we would go 2 times 7, which would give us 14. G, which is the long leg, is simply the short leg. So G would be equal to the short leg times the square root of 3. So that would be 7 square root of 3, which if we were to multiply that out, we would get 7 times the square root of 3. You would get approximately 12.12. So that would be approximately 12.12. They ask you to express as a radical in simplest form and as a decimal approximation rounded to the nearest hundredth. So that would be that would take care of both 7 square root of 3 or 12.12. So we'll just fill that in with the simplest radical, 7 square root of 3. Okay. All right. Going on to problem number 8, here we're given that the hypotenuse h is equal to 10. Well, that means that the short leg is going to be half that amount. So we would go to find f then. We would simply take 10 and divide that by 2, which would give us 5. So this gives us, so that's 5 right there for f. And g is simply taking the short leg and timesing that by the square root of 3. So here g would be equal to 5 square root of 3. And again, looking at the decimal approximation, if I went 5 times the square root of 3, I would get approximately 8.66. 8.66. So we'll fill that in with the simplest radical. So here we have 5 square root of 3. All right. Well, if g is 4 square root of 3, and we're going on problem number 9 now, so if the long leg, so g is equal to short leg times the square root of 3, and if that's equal to 4 square root of 3, that means that the x has to be equal to 4. So f, which is x, the short leg here, that's going to be 4. And to find h, all we're going to do is double that. So we're going to take 4. So h in this particular context, h is simply going to be 4 times 2, which would give us 10. No, it wouldn't. Geez, MrLovellFord, 4 times 2 gives you 8. Glad someone's watching me. So that would give you 8. And 4 times 2 does not equal 10. 4 times 2 equals 8. And finally, we come to number 10. Okay, and on problem number 10, here you're given that g, which is the long leg, is equal to 7.2. So, looking at these 3 lengths, if we said the length of x, or the length of f is the short leg, g is the short leg times the square root of 3, so we're saying that f times the square root of 3 is equal to 7.2. To find f, we're simply going to divide both sides of the equation by the square root of 3. So f then is equal to 7.2 over the square root of 3. 7.2 divided by the square root of 3. And again, if I'm trying to find the simplest radical form, I'm going to multiply this by a form of 1, which is simply going to be the square root of 3 over the square root of 3. And the reason we choose the square root of 3 is because when I multiply a square root by itself, it eliminates the square root. So in the denominator then we're going to have just 3, and on top we'll have 7.2 times the square root of 3. That is the simplest radical form right there. And when I go for the decimal approximation, I would simply go 7.2 times the square root of 3 and divide that answer by 3. I wind up getting approximately 4.16. So that's approximately 4.16. So this is going to be 7.2 square root of 3 over 3. Okay? And to find h then, I simply double that. So I would go 2 times 7.2 square root of 3 over 3. So 2 times 7.2 is 14.4. So my answer here in exact form would be 14.4 square root of 3 over 3. In decimal approximation then, that should be 8.32. So this would be 14.4 square root of 3 all over 3 if I leave it in exact form.